Welcome to Radio Abundance, a podcast by YIMBY Democrats for America. It's time to build again, folks. Fascism never made America great, but when progressives build, that's where you'll find American greatness. Welcome to Los Angeles, folks. Today's episode features a panel of Southern California YIMBY All-Stars. We've got Azeen Khanmalek, the Executive Director of Abundant Housing, L.A., Dulce Vasquez, a YIMBY activist and former candidate for public office who ran on an abundance platform, and Alex Melendrez, a longtime YIMBY activist and former national organizer. That's coming up right now on Radio Abundance.
You're listening to Radio Abundance, a podcast by YIMBY Democrats for America. Now let's get to the show.
Please welcome your host for the evening, YIMBY Democrats for America Executive Director Steve Boyle. And to kick things off, here's Steve.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I hate these guys.
Hey everybody, welcome to Radio Abundance. I'm your host, Steve Boyle, here on location in downtown Los Angeles with three amazing Angelenos, YIMBYs, abundance-minded Democrats. I'm with Azeen Khanmalek, Alex Melendrez, and Dulce Vasquez. Dulce, Alex, Azeen, thanks for hanging out with me today, and thanks for welcoming me to Los Angeles.
Thanks for having us. Happy to be here.
Why don't we go around, if everyone can maybe share for a second, just who you are. What's your background in the YIMBY movement? How'd you come to this? What are you most passionate about here? And what's on your mind today?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Azeen Khanmalek. Thanks so much for having me today. I am the Executive Director of Abundant Housing LA. For the past 10 years or so, we have been LA County's YIMBY organization. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization. We advocate for more housing at all levels of affordability throughout LA County. I am an urban planner by education and training, and that's how I first came into this work. I worked at the city of Los Angeles for many years for the planning department, and for several years at the mayor's office, focusing on housing policy, housing finance, land use, all in the service of building more housing. You know, I think in my journey in the public sector and as a policy expert in the housing space, I think what became clear to me over about a decade or so, and I started my planning career right as the YIMBY movement was also dawning and in its infancy. And so I think that, you know, I came to the realization that although I loved being a planner and I loved working for government, the solutions that we need to solve our housing crisis go beyond what any one city can do. Local advocacy and local organizing is extremely important to this movement, and it is in fact what Abundant Housing LA mostly focuses on. But this is not just a policy effort that we're involved in, right? This is a social effort to change hearts and minds, and it's also a political effort, right? To get the kinds of leaders elected that will actually pass the policies we all know we need to get out of our housing crisis. So that's kind of why I'm here today.
Yeah, well, speaking of the multi-pronged movement, Dulce, yes. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Dulce Vasquez, longtime Los Angeles resident, former candidate for Los Angeles City Council and California State Assembly. Been in the YIMBY movement for a long time. And I feel like as a candidate, I was kind of in like the first wave of those that were really honing in and centering pro-housing and abundance in my platform.
What year was that?
2022. So 2020 to 2022 was the campaign. And I got a lot of pushback for it, particularly in where I was running, where there are bountiful anti-gentrification efforts. And, you know, Azeen talks about sort of the social aspect of it and changing of hearts and minds. I was sort of swimming in this very big ocean, but I've continued in the movement. I'm a former board member of Abundant Housing. I continue to be involved with organizations like California YIMBY, YIMBY Action, launching YIMBY Latino with Alex, and I'm just happy to be here and continue to spread the message.
How about you, Alex?
Well, Alex Melendrez, I have been in some sort of combination of Democratic Party advocacy and YIMBY advocacy for the last 10 years. I've really started as a volunteer and basically worked my way up in a variety of capacities. I'm a former organizing manager with maybe 4 different former titles at YIMBY Action, from like LA organizing manager, regional Bay Area manager, national chapter manager, and for a while I was the equity officer at YIMBY Action, where I really focused on building equity-based coalitions, trying to work on affinity groups, and trying to diversify the movement, which is something I had been doing for a while, but was given more of like an official role with that. In the Democratic Party, I pretty much started as like any basic Democratic volunteer and worked my way up to be a DNC attendee. I got elected to my local Democratic Central Committee, which are the local governing boards for the Democratic Party. I should say most of this was in the Bay Area. I just moved here roughly a year ago. I've been neck deep in the state Democratic Party, and I like to joke that one of my biggest side missions in the California Democratic Party for a number of years has been to make it more pro-housing and more pro-abundance. And that's taken a lot of work, but given the last election cycle in 2024, we saw a big shift with that with, then Vice President Kamala Harris actually adopting a lot of the, housing shortage language and a lot of the messaging that was really important to some of the stuff that YIMBY Democrats of America is really pushing for. Speaks to kind of the origins of, YIMBY Democrats and the YIMBY for Harris movement. Basically, I've been doing that for a number of years, and my approach had always been to come from a grassroots building power approach. There's enough policy people out there, but I've always been somebody to focus on building power in people because that's really what it takes. The old joke I used to say is like, you could be right or you can learn how to win. We know we're right, and we have to work on winning. So that's basically where a lot of my work and background has been spent.
Nice. And Alex and Dulce, can you tell us a little bit about YIMBY Latino?
I think this is Alex's baby.
So one of the things that I started to notice around 2018 and 2019 is, I'm just going to speak kind of candidly, very oftentimes I was the only person of color in the room, as both my co-guests are probably familiar with. But over time, I did notice the movement start to grow more diverse over time. There was a variety of like online discourse and in-person discourse, not just in the Bay Area, but, in the state of California. A lot of YIMBYs and Latinos are like at odds, like the demographics a bit, but there were a lot of people in the abundance and YIMBY movement at the time who were Latino, who saw the connection of how their neighborhoods and displacement efforts were actually being affected by the housing shortage. One of the reasons why I started that was because I saw a real untapped audience there. There was an untapped group of people who felt like they didn't have a space to be both their like affinity-based self and pro-housing at the same time. There were a couple activists in San Francisco that were actually really mad that I started this. And one of my very first events was a walking tour of a freeway removal in San Francisco at the time. And it was to remove like this central freeway and basically replace it with like a park and housing. And some Latino activists, I say activists in the San Francisco, were really upset by that. But when I started building this audience, I noticed that there were a lot of people that were happy that they had a space. There were other, Latino YIMBYs out there who are really willing to, hold their value and hold their representation forward. Since then, we held a couple of events. I held a panel at the last YIMBY town on how to make the YIMBY movement more diverse. There was also a secondary panel by one of my good friends at California YIMBY. His name is Jordan, on Latinos in YIMBY. And since then, it's become just a more common thing to see.
Well, thinking of all of your cultural backgrounds, right? I'm curious about your experience growing up of housing, kind of your community, and I don't think you speak for the entire demographic, but everyone has a community, right? Thinking of your community's experience of housing, did you come to feel like you had developed kind of a heterodox take on that? And how? I mean, I think this is one of the most pivotal questions right now of the YIMBY movement, of the abundance movement, is, to me, one of the reasons I'm animated about this is because when you have scarcity, when you have a world where there aren't enough homes and it becomes an auction just for a roof over your head, the first people to lose and suffer are going to be marginalized people, are going to be vulnerable people, whether they're low income, whether they have historically not had access to certain communities or neighborhoods or levels of wealth. And it feels like this is, there's a tension, of course, when you have communities that are cultural communities that are vital, that we want to keep and sustain and thrive and protect, that are at risk from, gentrification, that are terrified of being displaced or sort of eradicated by new luxury towers. And so therefore, you end up fearing the idea of new housing. And then when you don't create new housing, then you get the opposite effect in the scarcity and hollowing out, not just of those neighborhoods, but of entire cities becoming inaccessible to people. But it's very challenging to talk about. It's very challenging to think, how do we protect people in a world where we're dealing with 50 years of a built-up housing crisis. And so even the solutions have in their kind of release valve challenges and transitions and transformations. So a big question, because it is a big question. Curious for your personal experience and sort of how you think about these wider questions.
So, for me, I came in through this as someone who has not struggled with housing. My parents my dad was a farm worker. He lived in farm-provided family housing. And when they sold the farm to build gated communities in South Florida, he was able to buy the housing that we were living in for $45,000 in the mid-1990s. So at $45,000, we never had to worry about our rent increasing. We never had to worry about, interest rates or whatever. So as an adult coming into the Los Angeles market and seeing increasing rents, I was able to buy a very, very small condo when prices were sort of down here in downtown Los Angeles, and sort of coming to the understanding of, I paid 10x what my parents paid for, tiny unit, but then realizing I'm going to have the same mortgage payment for 30 years. And then looking at communities that, I now live in South Los Angeles there are no condominiums in South Los Angeles. Actually, there's one condominium in South Los Angeles. It's on MLK and Figueroa. And that is the cheapest unit that you can buy in South Los Angeles. It was like $300,000 for, basically a studio. So being able to purchase into generational wealth, that creation of equity, that creation of stability of pricing, equity, being able to borrow against your equity for college education, for a new car if your car breaks down, and being able to pass something on to the next generation is really what drove me into this space. And thinking about, why don't we build more condominiums? And the laws are complicated around liabilities and everything. So that's initially, I'm like, we need to build more condos in order to get cheaper housing for families that can afford maybe a $200,000, $250,000 unit, right, in Los Angeles. And that is half the price of any decrepit house that it's on the market right now. So then sort of going into this and launching a campaign focused on housing and walking the neighborhoods of people living 10 people to a unit, living in squalor, basically, units that shouldn't be permitted, and living in housing that gets more, I don't know what the right word, deficient or, used year over year, right? It falls into disrepair over time. And every year they're charging them more. And I'm just like, why can't people understand that creating more housing, right, would provide more availability? And but also to your point, you mentioned something about luxury housing. At this point, the housing ability is so decrepit in certain areas that any unit, not luxury, literally any new construction is just seen as luxury.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, right? Luxury, of course, there's no meaning to it. There's no attribute. It is a branding term.
It's a branding term.
And rather than saying no luxury housing, I think everyone should have luxury housing. And I think the more luxury housing you build, the more people have luxury housing. And God willing, today's luxury becomes tomorrow's expectation. And 2 tomorrows from now becomes just an expected and extended benefit to everybody. That's what we want, right? We want everyone to have a good home.
Also, everyone advertises. I feel like everyone advertises
right.
their building
their
as luxury.
building is luxury. It's literally the most basic thing that you can buy.
Oh, isn't the old adage like a real luxury housing is a single family home?
That's right. That's right.
You got to move from that too.
So I grew up on the west side of LA in Palms. And so I think that my neighborhood that I grew up in is very exemplary of this debate around density and the need for more housing, right? I grew up in a single family home on the west side of LA, but Palms is also one of the densest parts of West LA. And so, I lived on a street with all single family homes, but all the streets around us were mostly apartments. And Palms, to this day, remains one of the most affordable parts of the west side of Los Angeles. It's not that affordable, right? But it is one of the most affordable parts of the west side of Los Angeles because it's got more units as a neighborhood than almost anywhere else, right? So it's this perfect encapsulation of more supply, offering more elasticity in the housing market and more affordability. And I think the thing that always really gets me when I go back to Palms, my mom still lives in the house I grew up in, is, because of a lot of the new density incentive programs and things like that, development in Palms has been taking off, especially on some corridors like around Overland and Westwood. And, I walk around and I'm like, wow, this is so amazing. Palms is becoming more walkable. It's becoming more interconnected. It got a transit stop, which was something I could only dream of when I was growing up as a kid. And, so I view it as really exciting, right? I will say a lot of folks in the neighborhood I grew up in don't necessarily see it as more exciting, right? But I think this also kind of Palms and the west side and the continued exclusionary nature of land use on the west side, I think also points the way forward to me, right? Like the complex thing about the housing movement is we do have to hold these two fundamental things together, right? That we need more housing extremely urgently. And eviction is a terrible and traumatic thing to go through, right? So, one of the campaigns Abundant Housing has been focusing a lot on over the past year and a half or so is we need to upzone the hell out of our single family neighborhoods, right? Especially on the west side of LA in some of our most historically exclusionary neighborhoods, right? To us, it's no wonder that we have these continuous and revolving cycles of gentrification and displacement, right? Because we're closing off 75% plus of our land to new multifamily housing development. I think the National Zoning Atlas that was recently just published, I was just looking at it, 79% of land that you can build housing on in the entire county of Los Angeles, it is illegal to build apartment buildings on, right? So if we really want to avoid gentrification and displacement, what that means is having the courage to confront the exclusionary nature of our land use regulations and reforming single family housing. That's the only way we're going to do it, right? Making the pie bigger, opening up the field to where we can build new housing. Because as it stands, it's like half a dozen you can build multifamily housing in like half a dozen neighborhoods in LA, and that's it.
Right. And that actually particularly reminds me of just like the two kind of narratives that we kind of use in that particular aspect. One of them in the housing movement is like we have like decades, maybe almost a century of racial segregation that we have to basically undo. And single family housing and our exclusionary policies, unfortunately, have deep roots in that. Even in some of our blue cities, segregation didn't just happen in the South; it happened like here. But that's one half of the coin is usually like addressing or redressing, I guess is the phrase, a lot of the historical segregation and economic opportunity that has been denied to people. But also kind of what we're trying to do now is shifting the narrative more to what's possible, the vision of economic development, how can we unlock those particular areas, And I think being able to hold those two together is a powerful narrative for where we should be going.
Yeah. I will say not necessarily zoning writ large, but density restrictions as a part of zoning are and always have been a tool of racist and classist exclusion. That's why they were invented. And even if that's not the intent behind them to this, today, 100 or so years later, that is what they still function as.
You know, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii recently teamed up with another favorite of ours, Congressman Scott Peters, on a new Build Housing Near Transit Act at the federal government. But he just took the floor of the United States Senate for a barn burner of a speech on housing, and did say zoning is a proxy for racism now being weaponized against the working class. And I have to say he's 100% right. And it's one of those things when you go back in time and these things get, it's the classic question, like, are highways racist? How can a highway be racist? When you're thinking about like Robert Moses or how Pete Buttigieg were talking about it, that sort of thing. No, zoning was racist, and it's not ambiguous. We're not reading between the lines. It is it's the same level of clarity as you ask, why did the Confederates secede from the United States? Like they told us it was for slavery. Zoning, they told us. They wrote it down. It was for racism. That was the point. It was first to say black people can't be in this neighborhood, and then to say Chinese people can't be in this neighborhood. And when that was struck down, it was not to say, oh, that's bad to say black people can't live in the neighborhood, or oh, that's bad to say Chinese people can't live in the neighborhood. No, it was struck down because the Supreme Court decided it was bad that those white homeowners didn't have the freedom to sell their homes to whoever they wanted to. So living where you wanted, that wasn't the legal issue. The legal issue was people who owned homes and had money being able to sell them to all their customers. Zoning is racist. Now, are there elements of zoning like the pig slaughter oil factory shouldn't be by my... Sure. For uses, whatever. But like, should people be able to live everywhere? Should that be illegal just because you crossed out where it said black and changed it to apartments? I don't think so. I don't think you can wink your way around from that. And when we talk about gentrification, I think we need to be thinking about and kind of encouraging the mirror image of that, right? Which is like, when we focus on, maybe here's a sort of a middle class cultural neighborhood, and what happens if wealthy white people move in? Well, what about the neighborhoods of only wealthy white people, or only wealthy whoever can tap their way into that neighborhood? I think the people from the cultural scenes and middle class should be able to move there, right? Every neighborhood should be for everyone, right? If you can build it, if it's your land, if you want to make a home, if you want to make a skyscraper, if you want to make a bunch of apartment buildings, if you can find a place to rent there for a night, a week, a month, a year, buy the rest of your life, people should be able to live if you're an American in the United States, you have to be able to live where you want in America.
Your neighbors shouldn't have to choose who's deserving and who's not.
No, it's bizarre. A neighborhood is not a private membership club, and this drives me crazy. And it drives me. I remember being in San Francisco. I was meeting. I met somebody who's part of a local sort of San Francisco Democratic Club for the West Side, which is very suburban. And he was sort of saying about housing. We shouldn't build housing. Shouldn't build apartments because the neighborhood had decided, as a neighborhood, they did not want 3-story buildings there, right? And again, I just couldn't help but think, man, if the neighborhood decided they didn't want Chinese people there, this guy, me, all of us would rightly say that is bullshit and unacceptable. Your local rule ends where human rights begin. It is not your property. It is not your call. Be racist in your own house. The neighborhood is for anyone. And I think that's got to be, if we want opportunity to be for everyone, if we want to lift everybody up, if we want to live by our progressive values, that means letting people live.
Yeah, there are those jokes you see of someone with one of those lawn signs, in front of the house. Like, in this house, we love everyone. We accept everyone's welcome, blah, blah, blah. Except, you can't build any new housing. You can't build an apartment building. You can't build affordable housing, whatever it is. Not here. It's not good enough. There's too much traffic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves. It's a huge problem in liberal circles and Democratic circles, most people in West LA are Democrats. You know what I mean? But they still don't see the irony, right? And I feel like a lot of Democrats and liberal progressive folks in LA don't see the irony in trying to say we're a sanctuary city. We welcome immigrants, right? But housing is so unaffordable that we can't functionally welcome anyone, right? Like, my parents are immigrants. They came here from Iran. They came to LA because it was a place full of opportunity. It was affordable. But we are closing the door behind us, right, to the next generation of folks who want to come to LA, whether it's from other places in the United States or from abroad, and make a life here, right, and pursue happiness here. We're not going to provide that kind of place unless we make housing affordable.
Trump doesn't talk about the wall so much anymore now that he has concentration camps to play with. But in his first term, it was a very routine event for San Francisco NIMBY activists. Maybe in the same day, you would protest Trump's wall and also say verbatim, we should build a wall around San Francisco.
Yeah.
I just don't think we should have walls in America.
This is the hypocrisy that basically got me into the YIMBY movement in the first place around 2017 or 2018, when I was coming off of just being like a young college advocate in Democratic Party circles. I went to some of my local Democratic clubs where everybody was significantly older than me. There was probably one person closer to my age. And it was nice to be around people who had these same kind of values as I did. And then when I tried to mention like housing nearby, all I got was just like, oh no, we don't want that near us. I'm like, wait a minute, that's holding our values in our own neighborhood though. It's like, why wouldn't we want to do that? And it's been something I feel like we're coming to a head, particularly right now, as we're trying to like offer a better vision for the Democratic Party of like how we open up basically blue cities. To some of the earlier points, it's like, it's not just like sanctuary city policies. We like to have a lot of these protective policies for people of marginalized identities. Open communities for the LGBTQ plus community, sanctuary city policies. We just codified abortion rights in California. But the thing that we don't usually recognize enough, or we're starting to recognize now, is that's only as good as the access that we allow it. And we don't have that access. We can't provide our blue cities and blue areas where we have these protections adequate, affordable, and abundant housing. So,
yeah, it is a sick hypocrisy, I think, at the heart of our values and our identity of who we are as progressives and Democrats, that I think is tantamount to a betrayal of promises we've made, which is like, look, Los Angeles is a sanctuary city proudly. San Francisco is a proud sanctuary city. Are they sanctuary cities? Not if you can't live there. If you can't afford the sanctuary, it's not a sanctuary. So these are sanctuary cities with walls against people who are coming to our doors seeking sanctuary. And I don't mean coming to our doors from outside the country. I mean, they're in this country and they have contributed to their communities, and they are good Americans, even if not in name yet, and people who need sanctuary and people that we claim to be protecting and offering sanctuary and safe haven to. But we are not. It's not a sanctuary if you can't afford it. And this is, I think also true for the queer community, for any kind of marginalized communities. Again, San Francisco prides itself on being a haven for the downtrodden and a refuge and a place where you can find your community and your people, and anyone can be accepted, but only if you can afford it, right? The days of Harvey Milk are gone. If you are a trans kid growing up in Oklahoma, you cannot dream of finding your people in San Francisco. You can't afford it. It is off the map for you. That to me is unacceptable. That to me is a betrayal of who we are as progressives. And that, I think, is why abundance is the road, not just to progressive victories in elections, but to progressive victories on policy, to progressive victories in our culture and values and the identity of who we are as Americans. I think this stuff matters for becoming who we say we are.
Mm-hmm. You could say the same for refugees. So actually, one of the things about my background I wanted to describe is I am half Mexican, and I've spent a lot of time organizing a lot of Latinos in the YIMBY space, but I'm also half Afghan. And one of the pivotal points for me in Democratic Party politics and just activism in progressive policies in general were refugee policies. In 2021, Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. And what you saw was just a wave of Afghan refugees trying to come into this country. And the Bay Area, and California in particular, is the biggest hub of Afghans outside of the country of Afghanistan. And it was near impossible for a lot of these refugee organizations to be able to find affordable places where these refugees can actually integrate into communities. And it was just something that I found like really disappointing. And I will say one of the things that I did notice, if we're talking about like larger coalition politics, is refugee orgs have started to hop on the abundance movement. I've in my prior work at YIMBY Action as like a national chapter manager and equity organizing manager, I often met with like refugee organizations where outside of actual refugee policy, their second biggest goal was trying to build enough housing to make sure that they can have areas where their targeted refugees could actually live in the communities where they can properly integrate. That's something I noticed in my background quite a bit.
Well, I'm thrilled and even a little emotional to know that refugee groups are getting behind building homes. The fate and how we've treated Afghan refugees is pretty near and dear to my heart. So I'm a survivor of specifically Al-Qaeda terrorism. I lived through an attack that they coordinated on the London Underground that was planned by Ayman al-Zawahiri. And, when the U.S. military was in Afghanistan, so many civilians and Afghans helped us out beyond measure and absolutely risked not just their lives, but their entire family's lives. They took a risk that a partnership with the U.S. could work, that America would stand true to our values, that we would keep our promises, that we would protect them, and that they could bet on civil society. And they didn't have to collaborate with the Taliban, or they didn't have to participate in perpetual cycles of violence. And so many people took that risk for us. They kept to keep their countrymen safe, to keep us safe, to help us track down bin Laden and dismantle Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And then when we got out of there, we said see ya, and we broke those promises. And now you've got people who work for us as translators, as spies, as couriers, just as help, as ambassadors, as people who helped us move around Afghanistan, who were promised that we would keep them safe, whether in Afghanistan or here. And they're not safe in either place. And so it's just another betrayal to me.
I have a family member with some horror stories on that particularly.
I do, on the positive side, I do want to give a shout out to Sean Van Diver, my friend down in San Diego, who started Project Afghan Evac, I believe, who has been doing a ton of policy work, hearings in DC to help protect and evacuate at the time and now protect the Afghan refugees that are here. Well,
speaking of shout outs, I'm curious what's going on in LA right now and who's rocking it, right? Whether they're an activist, an organizer, an academic or scholar, a policy thinker, somebody, city planner, someone in local government, the mayor, like who's doing great right now? Who deserves a shout out? What's the state of play in LA right now? And who should we be excited about and be championing?
There are some great bright spots, and there's some great folks. First, right now, I'm going to shout out Councilmember Nithya Raman on the LA City Council, who has been absolutely leading the charge on pro-housing policy in the city of Los Angeles. She just released a raft of motions, really all focused on making the housing development and permitting system better, faster, and more efficient in the city of Los Angeles. I mean, tackling ADU condoization, tackling power hookups for new multifamily buildings. She is whip smart on the ball and really thinking about how we can build more housing faster in the city of LA. I don't think it's limited to the city of LA either, right? We are a county of 88 different jurisdictions and the county of Los Angeles, which administers the municipal affairs of 1.5 million people in the unincorporated LA County. So, I think West Hollywood is doing a great job.
Santa Monica.
Santa Monica. I mean, West Hollywood, Culver City, and Santa Monica are three progressive West Side cities in the last election, all elected pro-housing city councils, and there are a lot of really great folks. And Jesse Zwick and Natalia Zernitskaya in Santa Monica are also really, leading the charge out there. Bubba Fish and Yasmin and Monty McMorrin in Culver City. John Erickson in West Hollywood. Chelsea Byers in West Hollywood.
New council member Danny Hang.
Yeah, those are the 3 of the 5. So, there are some great folks really leading the charge. I would even say our smaller cities right now in LA County are on the leading edge of housing reform. In LA County, I would say they are showing the city of LA, which is the big boy in our region, how it's done, what you should be doing, and how to lead with moral courage on the housing crisis.
Those are 3 great cities that have strong economic cores, strong restaurant scenes, strong nightlife, and adding to their resident population just increases the foot traffic, not just from tourism, but literally on a 24/7 basis. So I really love those 3. I am hopeful for the future because we have some really fantastic candidates running in 2026 that have, from the jump, adopted this abundance, pro-housing, we're going to get this done mentality. So I'm really excited about 26.
Anyone in particular you think we should be watching?
Sarah Hernandez, who would oversee, I think, half of downtown. Most of downtown, half downtown. Downtown needs a lot of help. I figured at some point we might address the sort of elephant in the background. This was the sort of failed project that lost funding during the pandemic. And at some point, what was that now, 2 years ago? We had these guerrilla graffiti artists tag literally all 3 buildings on every single floor. But it's a Chinese-owned development, and
that's it. That's the one.
That's
the graffiti building.
That's the graffiti tower.
This is it.
Look at that.
Yeah, this is it. So look at how many units we could have on the market, literally. But I know that there are. It's been sitting there for a while. It's been exposed to the elements. There's funding. There's all these things. But the fact that
$800 million.
Yeah, but the fact that also our city paid how many millions of dollars to just protect this building from further damage when it's privately owned, I don't. Yeah.
So my contrarian viewpoint on this is that we should make it a historic cultural monument and never change it. And we should feature it in the Olympics, the Olympic torch lighting ceremony should happen right in front of it.
Honestly,
is there a better symbol of the city of Los Angeles?
I disagree and don't disagree. I have thought about in the way that when you tore down the Berlin Wall, you had fragments of it as artwork. You should take down every single one of these glass mirror unit things and sell them off in auction and have them positioned all over. That'd be so cool. Literally spread it around the world and raise money.
I would also say a skyscraper of rogue graffiti is exactly the kind of thing that becomes, 50 years later, a cultural monument, right? And becomes beloved and everybody wants to live by this graffiti skyscraper. But But
look at this prime real estate. You're next to so much. There's a train station right there. There's the center of entertainment here in Los Angeles, the Staples Center, the Peacock Theater, et cetera. This is all, you're in the center of the city. This could be utilized to actually house people.
But how does this factor into YIMBYism? Is this, because it seems like a housing failure, right? It seems private developer, they get permission to build a big tower and they didn't sell the three big towers. And they didn't sell the units and now
they couldn't even finish.
They couldn't finish.
They lost their funding during the pandemic, couldn't finish it. Yeah. It's a failure. From all sorts of sides.
Well, we don't have to go that deep for it. We can just basically state that a lot of the policies that we have right now that pretty much prevent the development of housing, there's a laundry list, increase the cost of development. It becomes hard. This is why you can't find new funding for this sort of stuff. The old adage, this is why we can't have nice things, unfortunately. It's because all these restrictions, all these sequence receiving some reform. There may not be one particular issue that caused this particular death here, but it's adding those up are why you can't secure enough funding to redevelop it or even finish the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point, right? In terms of the how constrained our housing is by the cost just to build it and get it permitted, by the fact that only big community developers are shut out in favor of bigger and more corporate developers because they're the only projects that can pencil out, the only people who can spend the money to endure years and processes and grease the wheels of government.
There's an entire economy of lobbyists and consultants to just get permits in, to get things passed. There's probably billions of dollars in just consultants.
Yeah.
I think this is a point that I feel like gets missed and we do really need to hit, is that the people who really benefit from regulations that either ban new housing or make it difficult to build are large corporate developers and large corporate landlords. Mm-hmm. You know who really loves housing scarcity? Large national corporate landlords. And it's also not a secret. They put it in their quarterly earnings reports. Seattle built more housing and so now we can't charge as much. Those are the incumbents that really benefit from these kinds of regulations.
Yeah, I mean, the sum of all NIMBY fears, the NIMBY nightmare scenario of rampant YIMBYism, that is the current system. That world of extreme corporate consolidation where only the big guys can thrive and we're all shut out. That is the current system. Community developers, you can't do it. You don't have the money, you don't have the resources, you don't have the connections, you don't have the time. It's only a few big companies that can do it. And so the housing they build is always the big luxury towers because that's the only thing that pencils out. Or my favorite little pet thing as an aesthetic guy, those horrid 5/1 gentrification architecture. The fact that that's not some a brilliant architectural scheme or what we're condemned to build as housing because we've lost the arts. That's in the law. You can't build a beautiful Parisian Haussmannian building. You must, in fact, vary the colors at certain increments and the heights and the shapes and the textures and that clunky ass horrid gentrification buildings where you're like, who wants to live there? Not me. Why is that here? That is mandated and prescribed. We live in the oligarchy and the corporate takeover that shuts the rest of us out. That is the current system of intense permitting regulations, and we can be the antidote.
I think about this all the time as I'm driving down the 110 because all of these horrific Italian style 5-story apartment buildings built by Jeffrey Palmer, right? The big
in 2016,
Republican.
He was Donald Trump's single biggest individual donor.
Right. So I get nauseous thinking about this. I get nauseous looking at them. But also, it's the cheapest housing you can find in downtown Los Angeles.
I was going to actually lead into land value speculation here. It's if we want to circle back to something where we were talking about the prescription of just this standard, basically what is the NIMBY fear. It's because most of our land is locked up under exclusionary policies under single family zoning. This could be a good time to tie in a recent policy that was kind of going around in the YIMBY world in LA, which was ED1. It was a directive by the mayor of LA to basically speed up the permitting process for particularly 100% affordable housing. And Azeen can correct me if I miss some of the policy details here in the city of LA. Now, what people didn't know when it was started was single family zoned areas were included in that policy for a while. And what you saw were just tons of permits being sent in for development of multifamily affordable housing in these single family zoned areas. Why? Because it was possible, because there wasn't as much land value speculation and the whole area was just basically unlocked for that kind of potential. And then that got pulled back as soon as people started to figure out that was the case.
Yeah, and the conversation about gentrification, I think, always misses the areas that are already gentrified, namely by what I think you might call the landed gentry, which is to say, single homes, single estates.
There is a whole other conversation around gentrification or sort of the what now we have coined the left NIMBYs, right? And I wish I had that vernacular in 2022. But something very real is in these minority communities that are concerned about gentrification, where you still have housing, to buy a new house or to buy a house, it's not a new house, to buy a house, $750,000, and you start getting white people moving in and they're like, we don't want you here. Well, it's like that couple would have bought a $750,000 townhome in Santa Monica, but it doesn't exist, right? So you need to get on the movement to create that, townhome in Santa Monica if you don't want them moving into these neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we've been dealing with in San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
Like wealthy people want to move somewhere that is disruptive, but you know what? If you don't build them a shiny place to build,
Right.
they're not going to not come to San Francisco. They're going to just take your home,
Right.
drive up the price of your home,
Right.
and now everybody moves down a rung and is worse off. And we, in the conversation around gentrification, when we think of like urban renewal and Robert Moses and that hard era of obliterating neighborhoods, when we don't build homes, we make it hard to build homes, we're just obliterating neighborhoods in advance.
Yeah.
You would never go into somebody's home and say, you can't live here anymore, I'm knocking this down. We talk about evictions, we talk about displacement. It's not somehow moral if you do it in advance. If you wouldn't, once that building's built, go kick out everyone who lives there and tell them they're homeless now, don't do it before the building's built. Right. Those are all homes that people are going to live in, people with families, people who need them, people who are ready to be a part of your neighborhood community and your neighborhood character.
And there's this whole conversation, we talked about the Supreme Court law about decision around who you can sell to, yep. Right? So we're having that conversation now in historically minority communities where people have owned those homes for 60, 70, 80 years. They're passing away in their homes at ages 90 to 100. Their children are in their 60s and have their homes already elsewhere and just want the cash out. And there's this movement around like, well, don't only like sell your home to Black, Latino, or whatever, right? But it's like, well, this is their retirement. This is their generational wealth that they're passing on. Wouldn't you want them to sell for the highest dollar if they've invested their whole life in this? And I think that type of mentality is very toxic.
I have two dreams here, right? One is for anybody to live anywhere, so that you would never say, oh, I'm a white homeowner and I will only sell to white people. You also don't have to say, oh, I own this piece of property in my cultural community, I will only sell to members of my culture. Everyone in every culture should be able to go everywhere and be the full expression of themselves everywhere. And part of that full expression that I dream about is when we talk about neighborhood character, mm-hmm. we talk about culture. The argument right now is still a scarcity argument. Right. It's about displacement and change. Right. I want to think about extension and growth and glory and taking neighborhood character and saying it's not the height, it's the people, it's the culture, it's the aesthetics. And how can neighborhood character actually grow skyward?
Right. I'm so sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I have a couple narrative frames on this that I've thought about for a while. I want to tie this back to the organizing and the people stuff and, what we're trying to focus on with the Democratic, party and everyday people. I'm going to take an old expression from one of my old YIMBY friends who was a planning commissioner back in my hometown in the Bay Area, specifically on the neighborhood character. And I distinctly remember he said this one time at a council meeting, and it just stuck with me forever. He was like, our city is great, so let's make more of it.
Yep.
And that's like the kind of the core messaging we should really focus on.
Yeah. I don't just want to see the historic Latino neighborhood. I want to see a new historic, tall Latino neighborhood. I want to see skyscrapers that look like the culture and the aesthetic and the imagery and the heritage and the architecture and the colors. That skyscrapers, homes, apartment buildings in general, these are monuments. These are works of art, or at least they could be. These are expressions of who we are in our culture and what we value. And I think we should think of our neighborhoods not just as changing and evolving, but as canvases for us to paint on and leave our mark on. And if we have a culture and a community and a heritage and a history that we care about, and we all do, and hopefully many, we should be asking how to show that off to other people and to future generations by what we paint in brick and mortar and where we live and how we live and what we do together.
And I think what's important about this narrative framework of focusing on people, right, is that it's easy to get caught up in like the number of units and the density and the height, you know what I mean? And
the parking space.
The parking space, all these numbers, right? And at the end of the day, we really need to come back to the fact that like these are not just units, these are homes for people, right? The barista that you see every day at the coffee shop you go to, the person who takes care of your kids at daycare, whoever. They're like people in your community, and these can be homes for them, right? And also that through effective outcomes-focused policy and good housing policy, we can also provide for people, right? Provide for people and enable them to flourish throughout their entire lives, right? Like, we are an organization that is certainly very pro-tenant protections and pro-rent stabilization and very pro-housing, more housing supply, right? Because a critical component here is that people change, they grow, right? They have kids, they, create families. And so as your circumstances change, we also want to make sure that you don't have to leave LA because, I have 2 kids now and I need more space, and more space means an unaffordable rent. So I'm going to move to Riverside or San Bernardino or Arizona or Las Vegas or wherever, right? So it's like building more housing and ensuring that there's enough supply of all kinds of housing means that we can allow people to grow and change, age in place, and not force people to move to wherever because they can't afford a home.
And oh, by the way, if you do leave, you can come back.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, the idea that you can always come back. And I hope to come back to LA soon. This has been a delight. We could do this for hours, and I want to now, but we're not gonna. But no, it's delighted. It's such an honor to be with all 3 of you, and I hope to return to LA and be welcome back and do this again soon. Alex, Dulce, Azeen, any just final thoughts and real fast lightning round, but also where can people find you? Where can they follow your work? How can they get involved?
We are at abundanthousingle.org. We have 17 chapters all throughout LA County. We have fun ways to get involved, like happy hours, and boring ways to get involved, like sitting through a city council meeting to give public comment. But check us out. Check out what we've got going on. We love new members and new people.
Dulce Vasquez. I'm at Vazquez Dulce on TikTok and Instagram. Gonna start ramping up some political content for the 26th election. And speaking of politics and election, just on people's radar, SB 79 if you're in California.
Woo!
Alex Melendrez, my handle at pretty much every social media is AC Melendrez, MELENDREZ. I want to give a quick shout out to 2 LA candidates, one we mentioned earlier, Sarah Hernandez and John Erickson, both of which are running for the state Senate. And if I had something final, I'd say go register to vote, because that kind of matters at the end of the day.
Thank you. Alex, Dulce, Azeen, such an honor, so much fun. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for joining us on Radio Abundance. Thank you for the welcome to LA. Let's do it again soon. Thank you.
Yay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Radio Abundance, a new podcast by YIMBY Democrats for America. Now it's time for you to join the movement. We're building a big tent, and it's going to take all of us. Join us and fight for progressive abundance at YIMBYDemocrats.org.